Stagflation. Stagflation is when both inflation and unemployment are increasing, or when they are both relatively high, and if one or two of them is decreasing, they are not decreasing very fast. Starting back in 1829, it was British polymath John Stuart Mill who nailed what goes on with the business cycle. There can be too little cash money in the economy to grease all the transactions that people want to do, or would want to do if they had the income, if the transactions could be greased. In that case, you have idle factories, high unemployment, depression, and recession. Or there can be too much money chasing too few goods, and you can have inflation, as people find themselves unable to buy the goods that they want to buy at the prices they expected they would have to pay. As John Maynard Keynes wrote back in 1924, both of these are certainly bad and to be avoided. You want to have the economy at a point of balance, where aggregate demand is equal to potential supply, and you neither have unwarranted and unexpected inflation, nor unwarranted and unnecessary high unemployment and idle factories. But you are supposed to have only one of these at a time. When you have high inflation, but also high unemployment and idle factories, that is stagflation. Its appearance came as a great surprise to economists in the 1970s. For after all, the tradition of analysis dating back to John Stuart Mill in 1829 would say you should only have one or the other. But pretty much only with the 1970s in the global north. Only then did we have episodes in which unemployment was relatively high and the economy was depressed, and in which inflation stubbornly refused to fall back to normal or subnormal levels, even though the economy was clearly in a recession or a depression. Now, there are smart people, there are intelligent people, of whom I think an enormous amount, who think we might well be entering a period of such stagflation. And I really do not understand why they think this. After all, it took us nearly a decade. It took us nearly a decade from 1966 to 1975 to get into the stagflation of the 1970s. And it then took a lot of bad luck, a lot of adverse shocks happening in rapid succession, a semi-perfect storm of bad things happening on the macroeconomic front to keep us in stagflation from 1975 to 83. A configuration in which unemployment is rising and factories are being idled, and yet people are still expecting and counting on there being more money in the economy next year, and so raising their prices and bargaining for higher wages. That is very unusual, hard to sustain. When it happened, we then failed to get out of it in 1984, but by then it had been 2 decades building. In other cases, we do not see anything like this. The episodes we see are much more like the very brief inflation during the Korean War, when inflation spikes to 8% for 1 year, a discrete jump in the price level, but then things go back to normal. Now, once stagflation is entrenched, solving it pretty much requires having a regime change by the part of central banks, as Paul Volcker did in 1980, declaring that he did not care how high unemployment and interest rates went, he was going to make stopping inflation job number one. It succeeded, he succeeded. It took 4 years. It put lots and lots of people out of work. It generated the Rust Belt in America. It bankrupted Mexico. We really do not want to have to do that again unless we absolutely have to. But so far I see no signs of this stagflation at all. What I see is the world economy trying to rejoin the highway at speed, trying to get back to full employment. In the process, we need to shift an awful lot of people out of one set of occupations into another set as we adjust to the conditions of our semi-post-COVID economy. But whenever you rejoin the highway at speed, you leave a bunch of rubber on the road. To complain about that reveals you simply do not understand what rejoin the highway at speed means and entails. And rubber on the road, not stagflation, That's what we are seeing today. That is how I characterize the price rises in response to shortages and bottlenecks and supply chain disruptions. And so the price increases, these are all a healthy and necessary part of economic adjustment. They are a needed consequence of a rapid return to full employment, which is something that we very much want to do. Now, right now, I see no signs that this process will leave us with a configuration of high expected inflation and high unemployment some 2, 3, or 5 years down the road. It will not leave us with a legacy of stagflation and a stagflation problem. And I do not understand why people, especially people whose usual intellectual position these days is one of great worry about secular stagnation, about an economy with persistent deflationary pressures, about an economy in which the natural interest rate keeps falling below the zero lower bound, why such people are worried about stagflation given the numbers we have seen so far. It just does not fit. And of course, there are those who question whether we should in fact prioritize a return to full employment. Of course we should. An economy in which a lot of people are unemployed is an economy that is not working. Everyone who has a sustainable business model should be able to find customers with the money to provide healthy demand for their products. Everyone who wants a job should be able to find one at the real wage their work is worth in normal times. Getting the macroeconomy in balance so that unemployment comes down, and comes down quickly to full employment levels, that's the lexicographically prior task of macroeconomic policy. Doing other things, including offsetting and repairing any adverse side effects of getting us to full employment, those are secondary and tertiary goals, goals to be postponed until after the primary goal of returning the economy to full employment has been accomplished. I've never understood why policymakers thought different back in 2010, thought that their job was over after the financial crisis had passed. Perhaps there was a false assumption and presumption there that the economy would rapidly return to full employment on its own. If so, it was never soundly based on any analysis of history or theory. I would say that prioritizing full employment is what policymakers have normally done ever since Franklin Delano Roosevelt started his New Deal back in 1933. At least is what smart policymakers have done. So from my perspective, it is not at all unusual or surprising to see policymakers right now prioritizing the return to full employment and postponing worries about what I see as a very remote and low probability possibility of stagflation in the future. I think that is a very normal and proper thing for them to do.